what makes Jim's story, I think, so compelling partly is, first of all, it's always fun. For Jim, work was always fun. So it's sort of a story on following your bliss. Jim was never embarrassed at making money off of his work. He was never embarrassed that the Muppets were paying the bills. He wanted to be in television. And I think one of the neat stories about him is Jim wasn't one of these guys that wanted to be a puppeteer. When he was a little kid, he wasn't playing with puppets. He didn't want to be a puppeteer. He didn't go to puppet shows. He really wanted to be on TV. And there was an ad in the Washington newspaper for people to perform puppets on a local television show. So again, there's how pivotal Maryland is in the story. So Jim, who had never built puppets, never saw a puppet show, didn't want to be a puppeteer. He's a senior in high school. He's at Northwestern High in Hyattsville. And he checked 2 books out of the library and taught himself how to build and perform a puppet in about 2 weeks. And he went down to the local CBS station and auditioned and got that job and got him into TV. And that's where Jim really wanted to be. He wanted to be in television. Puppetry for him was a means to an end. He really wanted to be in TV. He thought he'd be a designer or a set designer. So Jim's story is all about sort of like following your bliss there, figuring out, solutions to problems. And puppetry was his solution to getting into television. And he's just one of these guys who is always, never takes his eye off his own ball and is constantly pitching, constantly working. He's a creatively restless guy. He wants the Muppet Show, and he knows the Muppets are going to work on television, for example. It takes him 10 years to get there. Once he gets the Muppets on television, he's kind of ready to start something else now. He gets the Muppets on TV. They're the biggest show in the world, and at the height of its fame, 5 years they've been on the air, Jim walks away from it to go do something else. He wants to go do movies. He really wanted to do The Dark Crystal even very early on. He wanted to make The Dark Crystal even before the Muppet movie. But Jim was one of these guys who, once he sort of hit that pinnacle, he was ready for the next pinnacle. He just was constantly in motion, constantly moving, constantly trying to follow his own dream, and completely invested in himself, knew that what he did had value, which I think is another really great lesson for creative people. Believe in that your work has value. And that really translated over to the way Jim ran his business. Which I think is another really neat lesson in this book. Jim was an extraordinarily good businessman, which you sort of suspect because you can't really have a company that's straddling the ocean. He's got workshops in London, workshop in New York, unless you have a good business sense. But Jim was really aware of business from the time he was 17, 18 years old. And in the early 1960s, he had built Rolf the dog for a Purina dog food commercial in Canada. And the Purina company offered him a large sum of money to own that character outright. And Jim's agent, Bernie Brillstein, went to Jim and said, "You need to take this deal. This is a great amount of money." And Jim said, "Bernie, never sell anything I own." Jim knew his work had value as a very young man. And so when Sesame Street came along and was the biggest show in the world, Jim owned all his characters. So when the merchandising deals come along, Jim owns all his own characters. So he can make money off of his characters. Again, he was never embarrassed by that. He didn't want products to stink. He had personal control over all those things, and he would scrap products that he thought were junk. He didn't want people to feel ripped off by it. So again, it was sort of his work ethic even informing the business side of things. But again, never embarrassed at succeeding or making money with puppets. Not somebody like Frank Oz, who was never convinced it was something a grown man should do for a living.